I want to start off this review by quoting Roger Ebert's review of the film. Tom Hanks does a superb job of carrying Castaway all by himself for about two-thirds of its running time, but isn't much helped by additional characters in the opening and closing sequences. Here is a strong and simple story surrounded by needless complications and flawed by the last act, first disappoints us and then ends on a note of forced whimsy. I wanted to share that with you guys, firstly because it seems fairly appropriate given that he passed away yesterday as I record this, but also because it just perfectly echoes my own thoughts on this film. The middle of this film is an absolutely outstandingly brilliant film, and I think if the middle of this film was the entire film, this would probably be up there, and I think my own personal top 10 is one of my all-time favourite films. The middle of this film is absolutely brilliant. A fantastic everyday guy stranded on a desert island kind of story, and Tom Hanks carries it single-handedly, wonderfully, and honestly, I just think if it had been anyone other than Tom Hanks, it wouldn't have worked. He just becomes the character stranded on a desert island so wonderfully. He's just so fantastically brilliant. Now, I'll get more into why that part of the film is so good in a minute, but first of all, I just want to talk about everything else that is in this film, which is just complete and utter crap, and it just prevents this film from being truly outstanding, really, and just a kind of fairly good film. The first 20 minutes, we are introduced to the fact that Tom Hanks' character is a delivery man for FedEx, and he's obviously very hard-working. He takes his job seriously, and he expects the people who work under him to take their job equally seriously. He's very sort of committed to providing a good service. You know, he's a decent guy. You know, and he has a girlfriend played by Helen Hunt. They have a perfectly healthy relationship. He's not really a workaholic, and he doesn't, you know, take his job like overly seriously. He's not a bad guy to work with, from what we see of him. He's not unkind to anyone in particular. He's not any kind of dick just because of how seriously he takes his work or anything. He's just a normal guy, really. He's just living a relatively normal life. He just happens to be a delivery man. You know, they spend like 20 minutes introducing just this guy who's just basically a normal guy who lives a relatively kind of normal life, really. There's nothing in the first 20 minutes of any major value, really. The only real things that you really need to know before he gets stranded on the island are that he is planning to propose to his girlfriend when he gets back from the trip that ultimately ends up being the reason he gets stranded on the desert island. So obviously that's kind of an insult to injury kind of thing, which is kind of cool, really. You know, not only does he get stranded on a desert island, but he was about to propose to his girlfriend. And also that his girlfriend had just given him this watch with a picture of her in him that he has on him when he gets stranded on the island, so obviously that stays with him the whole time he's there. From what I can tell, those are really the only things that you really need to know from the first 20 minutes. There's nothing else that happens in the first 20 minutes that you really need to know for the portion when he's on the island. Just before he gets onto the island, there's a really intense plane crash scene, and although it doesn't really tie into anything else that happens in the film, just as a scene on its own, it's absolutely wonderfully done. It's really intense, really quite frightening actually. It gives you a really good idea of just how terrifying it would be to be in a plane crash. However, if you know the premise to this film before you start watching, you kind of know he's going to survive the plane crash. So in that sense, it's maybe not quite as gripping. But as a scene on its own, it's pretty good. But it doesn't really tie into anything else that happens in the film. So obviously then he gets onto the desert island. And honestly, from this point on, it really does sort of feel like a documentary almost. It is very much a kind of realistic sort of portrayal of what would really happen if just a sort of typical kind of normal guy who lived in the modern day world got stranded on a desert island. He kind of has an idea of what to do when you get stranded away from civilization. You know, he understands that you need food, water and shelter in order to survive. He kind of has an idea of how to open a coconut, but he doesn't really know how to go about. He has the idea that you need to make fire in order to get anywhere, you know, with making food, you know, cooking things like crab and catching fish. And one particularly interesting thing that, they use the fact that he's a FedEx delivery man to their advantage is he comes across these parcels and he uses a lot of them while he's on the island, like the ice skates. He uses the blades as an axe. So that was pretty creative, I thought. Kind of the way that this guy is. He's just sort of a normal guy who just happens to have got stranded, you know. And that is kind of the thing about Tom Hanks' character in this. He is just kind of normal, really. And that's really what this film really should be, I think. It is just sort of a typical down-to-earth, everyday guy gets stranded on a desert island. It didn't really need to be anything more. And yet the the opening 20 minutes and then the last act of the film kind of give the impression that the film is trying to be more than that, but I'll get to that. I kind of like the way he's not monologuing. It would have been very easy to sort of have him monologue throughout so we could hear what he was thinking, because obviously he probably wouldn't talk out loud if he was on his own on a desert island, but if you were reading this in a book, you would have a narrator, and I honestly don't like narrators in films. I kind of feel like I'm listening to an audiobook, so I'm glad that they didn't go down that route. What they do instead is they have him cut his hand at one point, and then he picks up a volleyball that was in one of the parcels that got washed ashore. And then he notices later that it looks kind of like a face, so he makes a face on it, and it becomes his friend, which he calls Wilson. I suppose really is sort of the first thing people think of when they think of this film. They think of the volleyball Wilson, who's named after the company that made the volleyball. The fact that a volleyball is kind of the main character that we relate to and grow to love and remember is really a sort of a testament to just how much sort of Tom Hanks brings to this role, because obviously he creates the volleyball character and he sort of speaks for it. So that's absolutely fantastic. You can create a character out of a volleyball to sort of make you feel like there is more than one person there, and obviously it gives him someone to talk to so that we, the audience, can hear a few things about what he's thinking. One kind of weird thing about the sequence on the island that got to me a little bit is the fact that sort of maybe a little over halfway through that sequence, we skip forward 4 years. I don't know if that was the best way to go about it. I mean, obviously, you want to give the impression that he's been there for a long time. Not an unimaginably long time, but a decent length of time, certainly, that it would, change him as a person, I suppose, and it would obviously change his appearance. And it was no longer a case of him just surviving for the time being until someone came to get him. It was a time period where he's been there for long enough to sort of concede, they've given up searching for him, no one's going to come and rescue him. This is his life now, he's been there for 4 years. I think, really, they would have been better off maybe just skipping forward a year, then 2 years, and then another year or something. I don't really like sort of just showing the beginnings of him being on the island and then showing the endings of him being on the island. I think they would have been better showing a bit more of the middle of that, really, because it seems to me like we only saw maybe the first month of him on the island and then the last couple of weeks of him on the island. And considering he was there for 4 years, that doesn't really seem like enough to me. I would have liked to have seen a bit more of the middle part of that. But it's still very interesting to see sort of how far he's come in 4 years. The fact that he still has the watch that his girlfriend gave him, the fact that he still has Wilson, and he's, customised him a little bit. I kind of like that. One kind of confusing thing, I think they could have used him talking to Wilson a little bit more to their advantage here, because I'm a little confused by this. He seems to come up with an idea to build a raft because part of a portaloo gets washed ashore. It indicates to him that the tide is coming in from the American west coast, perhaps, so he decides that the wind is going to change direction at some point and send him back to the American west coast or something. I don't know, because that never actually happens when he actually goes out there. He just drifts for a while. We also find out that he contemplated committing suicide for a brief period, which is, again, very sort of realistic. I think that's probably the kind of thing that probably would happen if just a normal guy got stranded on an island, and certainly if he was there for a while, you would just consider taking your life at some point. But he actually found that he wasn't going to be able to do that, at least not in a particularly clean, painless way. So he heads out into the sea eventually, and it's only at this point, with less than an hour to go in the film, which is over 2.5 hours, by the way, that we actually get some score. That's kind of interesting, actually, because the last, I think 40 minutes of this film actually has quite a lot of score in it, but it's not until, about 40 minutes before the end of the film that we actually get any score at all in this film. The whole time he's on the island, no score whatsoever. That's kind of interesting. One of the packages that he opens up when he first arrives on the island is a birthday card. It's one of the strangest birthday cards I've ever seen, because the message inside isn't happy birthday, it's the most beautiful thing in the world is of course the world. How does that tie into it being your birthday? That's a weird birthday card, a weird message to have in a birthday card. Is that supposed to be complimentary to the person reading the card or something? I don't know. It's kind of found kind of weird. And of course we see him making fire shortly after that, and we see the evolution of him sort of using a bit of knowledge that he's picked up maybe from watching TV programs or from school or something, because obviously he's not like a caveman who would be learning all of this from scratch. He doesn't kind of know things from just watching TV, I'd imagine. Then obviously he goes out onto the sea. That actually was a little disappointing, that sequence on the sea, because there's not a huge amount that really happens out on the sea of any real interest. He sees a whale, bit of life that he's seen. Well, he saw a couple of crabs, I suppose, but it's the first sort of major bit of life that he's seen in 4 years. So that was kind of a momentous moment to him. And I guess the whale follows him round from that point on, because it keeps shooting out water from its air hole at him. The sort of big emotional scene, again, the sort of scene everyone remembers from this film, is when he loses Wilson in the sea. And again, it's a real testament to what sort of Tom Hanks has brought to this character, which he's basically sort of created through his acting. This is just a volleyball floating adrift in the middle of the ocean. And yet it's a really emotional scene. It's really sad, and you really sympathise with his character to see him lose this volleyball, you know, that has been with him for 4 years. I mean, it seems kind of weird that you would get this upset over losing a volleyball, but it's been the closest thing to a companion he's had for 4 years. You know, you can completely understand why it would be so traumatising for him. You know, the film really starts to go downhill once, well, just before, actually, he is returned to civilization. He sees a boat, so obviously he's like, oh, finally returned to civilization. And then 4 weeks later, first of all, he's only returning to the States in the scene where we see him 4 weeks later. That is an awfully long time in between him being rescued and then him returning to the States, you know, for the fact that he's only now returning to the States. What has he been doing all this time? Has he needed to be re-granted US citizenship or something? You know, does he need a visa or something? I don't know. They never explain exactly what he's been doing all this time. I don't know if maybe they thought it was symbolic. You know, they had the 4 years later transition earlier in the film, so they thought 4 weeks later it was kind of clever or something. Yeah. This film has a lot of stuff like that where I'm thinking to myself, oh, they're trying to be clever, or they're trying to be artsy, or they're trying to be symbolic in some kind of way, and it really just doesn't work. But anyway, there's absolutely nothing in between him seeing the ship for the first time and him returning to civilization in the States. There's no sort of initial reaction to the people on the boat seeing him. There's nothing where they go down to meet him, ask him how he is, ask him what he wants, you know, do they even speak English? His initial reaction to, you know, finally meeting human beings for the first time in 4 years. We don't even see him get a shave or anything, returning to land, you know, the people's reaction to him there. You know, we don't see any of that. Really would have loved to have seen, you know, the initial reactions to him returning to civilization and what that was like, not only for him, but for the people who rescued him. I do like the fact that they don't show any of the people he left behind, what their reaction is to him being lost at sea. We don't see them again until he returns to civilization. You know, I like the idea that we are seeing this through Tom Hanks's character's eyes. You know, we only know what he knows. You know, it's sort of like he is us in a way. I absolutely love the idea that he only finds out what happened once he's returned to civilization. Once he's returned to civilization, there's nothing particularly interesting to be said of that anybody's been doing while he's been away and what they do now that he's back, really. He just goes back to work, essentially. There's a brief mention, I think, at the start of the film that some friend of his is dying, or some friend of a friend of his, or I don't know, was it his wife or something, was dying of cancer or something, and then obviously once he's returned to civilization, the wife has died. We barely knew this guy in the early part of the film, so, you know, we really don't care, or I certainly don't care anyway. And then his girlfriend, obviously, is the one other character other than Tom Hanks's character that we actually do kind of give a shit about. So that was kind of interesting, seeing her again and seeing... Actually, her reaction to him returning to civilization is kind of weird. I mean, obviously, initially it's kind of a shock. We see her faint when she first finds out. She was supposed to meet him back when he comes back to Memphis, where they're from. But apparently, I guess she's too traumatized to meet him. But then apparently, you know, in the evening when he goes to her house, she seems like perfectly fine about it. Yeah. I don't get her behaviour. He sees her through the window in the building where he's supposed to have been meeting her. She's really upset about something. You know, she's having to be consulted by her husband about, you know, not wanting to meet him or something. She's looking really upset, and then in the evening she's just fine about it. She seems like perfectly normal from what I can see. You know, she greets him in the house, and she just politely asks him, just tells him what she's been up to the last 4 years. So I don't quite understand why she was so upset in the scene we saw her before. Then there's all this nonsense about the possibility of her getting back together with him, even though she's married with a kid now. That's just complete nonsense that she would want to, or, you know, not that she would want to come back. get back together with him, but that she could get back together with him. It's ridiculous to think that she could do that now that she's married with a kid. Really weird statement, actually, that she makes right at the end there. She says, oh, everybody told me you were dead and I didn't want to believe them. Well, so you were absolutely convinced right up until the time when he returned, like 4 years later, that he was still alive? I guess I'm willing to accept that, except for the fact that you are now married with a kid. Like, why have you married someone else and had a kid with them if you're so convinced that your boyfriend is still alive? Doesn't that really count as cheating on him? I like the presence of the girlfriend character, but the development of her is kind of crappy, really. And then, there's all this kind of symbolic stuff that they try to go into here. There's this recurring image of wings that are on this package that he's planning to deliver to this woman right at the end of the film. Don't really know what the purpose of that is. We just keep seeing it throughout the entire film. He paints it on the portaloo that he uses as a sail when he escapes from the island. Don't understand the purpose of that. The movie begins and ends at the same setting, this crossroads. Don't understand the purpose of that. There's the fact that he says, I'll be right back, right before he goes off to board the plane, where he ultimately crashes and gets stranded on the island, symbolic kind of irony, that he says he'll be right back, and in fact it's 4 years before she sees him again. Doesn't really sort of tie into anything, it doesn't really mean anything, I really didn't care that much about the girlfriend character, other than maybe how she related to Tom Hanks' character, really. So that was kind of pointless, really. We've barely seen the girlfriend character throughout the entire film, and I like the fact that we haven't seen the girlfriend character very much. I like that we focus completely on Tom Hanks' character. It would have been very easy to intercut what was going on back in Memphis with what was going on the island, but because they understand that this is Tom Hanks' character's story, who I honestly can't remember the name of his character, honestly, I really should know that, but this is his story. We see it through his eyes. We only know what he knows. Love the fact that they've done that. So yeah, this is an absolutely wonderfully brilliant film for about, let me think, an hour and a half, and then the other hour of it, the first 20 minutes and then the last 40 minutes, complete garbage, honestly. So overall, I suppose you would have to say that I suppose over half of this film is brilliant. So I would probably say a 7 out of 10. If you ever see this film on TV, take note of the time when it starts, then wait 20 minutes after that point and then start watching the film, and then as soon as he's returned to civilization, turn it off. That would be my recommendation to watching the film, because the only stuff worth watching in this film, starting with the plane crash and then ends with him returning to civilization. That's that for today, guys. I enjoyed the middle part of this film. I didn't enjoy the rest of it. I don't know if maybe you guys took more value from the beginning and ending of this film than I did. Maybe you understood, the symbolism or the artsy elements of this film a bit better than I did. I don't know. Let me know. But anyway, that's Castaway, guys. It's absolutely brilliant for an hour and a half, but it's utter crap otherwise. Okay, see ya.